Hello and welcome to the session, everybody. My name is Hari Candadai and I run Service Innovation and Thought Leadership here at Origina. It is my pleasure to introduce to you this session. We're going to be talking about Origina's recent announcement launching software, third-party software maintenance for the IBM Z mainframe product. We're going to hear about why did Origina launch this, why now, what are the capabilities that we're going to bring to bear, as well as the benefits of introducing the support to IBM customers. To help us with this conversation, it is my pleasure to introduce to you two perspectives. One from a customer's perspective, Southern California Edison. Chris Lecosia is here with us today, as well as here Origina's perspective. We have Rowan O'Donoghue, who's the co-founder and CTO at Origina. So welcome to the session, gentlemen.
Thanks, Frank.
Maybe we start with you, Chris. Just a quick introduction, your role at Southern California Edison, and then we'll go to you, Rowan, and then we'll start the conversation.
Beautiful. Thanks, Hari. So I worked for Southern California Edison beginning in 2009, and I was brought in as a software asset manager, a senior advisor. Prior to that, I had worked at IBM. I ran their North America Z compliance team. So that started my foray into looking at licensing and the business side of IT after being in the technical side of IT. So while at Edison, it was my marching orders to essentially manage the licenses, renewals, subscription costs of the entire estate's software portfolio. That is where I became introduced to Origina. It's where I got to meet Rowan and Tomas.
Great. So Rowan, your introduction and your role at Origina today?
Yeah, thanks, Harry. So I'm Rowan O'Donoghue, CTO, co-founder with Origina. So my overall responsibility is the service offering for our customers, making sure there's a value add, working with customers like Chris, just to understand pain points and challenges, and just continually innovate to make sure we have the service offering that meets their requirements.
Great. Yeah. So speaking of pain points, Chris, maybe we start with you. Is what were some of the pressures? What were some of the pain points that you, as responsible for the IBM landscape at Southern California Edison, what were you faced with if you rewind a few years before you got to Origina, and then we'll get into the story?
So Edison had been predominantly a mainframe shop for many, many years. I believe one of our first contracts that I saw was in the early 80s. So what was happening at Edison was that California, as you might know, faced a few years of very, very serious wildfires. And the cost to remediate and to strengthen our network to protect against wildfires was tremendously expensive. As those costs started to rise, and as this new program started to run to replace our customer-facing system, our expenses started to rise respectively. And I was faced with a situation where my annual maintenance budget for both software maintenance, subscriptions, net new licenses, both capital and expense, was growing very, very rapidly, too fast for my finance department and my CIO to be comfortable with. And along with the financial pressures, we also had two other interesting pressures happening at the same time. We were starting to broaden our portfolio with many other vendors other than the IBM suite of products. And we had a number of legacy products still running on both the distributed and the mainframe side. And the cost for those products was getting very high. And we were running older versions of those products that we could not get maintenance from IBM for, except at some very expensive prices. So I had financial pressures. I had pressures to maintain the integrity of that mainframe system while we were migrating to a replacement system. Mm-hmm. And predominantly, the pressure to be able to have a production-ready, fireproof system while we were migrating to the new system was top on the list, as well as the cost. So
that's when you got introduced to Origina and you were looking at an option or a choice to keep your systems running at the best value possible.
Now, I had known about third-party software maintenance for many years. And Rimini Street, for example, with SAP and Oracle, but I could not find anybody globally who provided IBM software maintenance support. I had an engineer, hello, Rowan, had an engineer in our architecture group. His name was Hem Kishore. And Hem mentioned to me one day, well, you know, there's this company out of Ireland called Origina, right? And they do third-party software maintenance for IBM. I go, no, nobody does IBM third-party software maintenance. And that seed that he planted percolated in my head. And somewhere around maybe 6 to 12 months later, I faced a situation where I was running an old version of MQ series on the distributed side. And IBM no longer offered extended support for it. They would go into a custom contract for us, but besides the cost of the custom contract, I still had to pay my base subscription and support costs. It was astronomical. And I remembered Origina. I called up Origina, and that started our relationship.
Great. So Rowan, share the Origina value proposition, the model, and how did Origina successfully, or why is the model able to successfully sustain such a complex IBM landscape? Just a little introduction to the model, and we'll get to the said product line.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the challenge that Chris mentioned there. So in this situation where, and we see this the whole time, a lot of organizations, they're running older versions of software products. You know, you got to pay your base maintenance, then you got to pay extended support on top of it. That's very much short-lived. And sometimes when you do run into problems, you don't actually get, the access to the right skills to actually resolve those issues. So I think when we first started out and Chris reached out, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I think sometimes we didn't have the credibility. Chris mentioned, didn't think there was a player in the marketplace. So we engaged and we said, listen, why don't we do a trial for 6 months? You log tickets with, you keep your maintenance with IBM, but you log tickets with ourselves as well. And let's see how we get on. See if we can develop some confidence. And I think there was an issue where you had an MQ problem that was maybe open for a couple of months, maybe 6 months?
I believe it was open for 6 months, and we had been tossed back and forth to different problem desks at IBM.
Yeah.
Origina offers us a proof of concept.
Yeah. So we have a challenge.
Right.
And I think we brought in one of our, I guess coming back to the question about the model and how it differentiates to IBM. With our model, unlike, you log a ticket to a support desk, you get a random person behind the team. It could be anywhere globally with IBM. And we, if I go back to our origins, we always wanted to create that kind of intimate, kind of a personal kind of service.
Right.
So we assign dedicated resources per product. And in this situation, I think for the MQ ticket, we were able to resolve that within a matter of, I think it was about 4 hours. So I think that's really kind of bringing out the essence of the value of that dedication, the expertise that's there, and the knowledge continuity. And I think, listen, that's kind of really where the journey of trust started. And then maybe the guys in SCE brought us in a bit closer to help them with their challenges.
And is that, Chris, based on what Rowan is saying in terms of the trust, the credibility, looking back, you started off with a Passport Advantage set of products, right, for support. Did Origina deliver on the promise that you set out to, which led to the subsequent confidence in the Z product line? But let's start with the experience with the Passport Advantage product.
I'm a people person by nature, and if there's not some kind of an attraction, of an understanding, of a mutual respect, of a trust that I get at a personal level, I'm very suspicious at a professional and technical level. So my first introduction was during that proof of concept. And from that proof of concept, within maybe 2 weeks, I had kind of built in my head a trust model towards Origina. And very quickly after that proof of concept, I gave Origina support for the Rational set of products, for our identity management products, our WebSphere portal software. It was quite a large give and quite a large decision to move forward with. I had to garner the trust and the support from my leadership team, right? And when they heard about the MQ series problem being solved in hours versus the 6 months it had been at IBM, I got their backing. Now, there was a lot of due diligence before we decided to go with Origina. but we built the foundation of trust and the experience, and it was close to 2 years worth of distributed support that we engaged with Origina for. After that time was when we actually engaged with Origina for our Z series support. However, as Rowan will tell you, I had been asking Rowan and Origina if they would take on the challenge of managing our mainframe IBM software.
And I was going to ask you, Chris, how did that opportunity come about? When did you think it was the right time for Origina to extend that support to the Z product line? Maybe even the challenges that you felt with Z would be good to start with and connect that back to Origina.
There is absolutely a skills gap that's been developing in the mainframe world for a long time now. And many of the seasoned mainframers had retired out of the mainframe proficiency, if you will. So we were losing valuable talent, right? I talked to you about this new customer-facing system that was being stood up, very expensive system. I talked to you about wildfires in California that were very costly to Edison to remediate. And here I am with this software maintenance budget, subscription maintenance for both distributed and mainframe. And it was growing exponentially each year, right? And just explaining that to people was difficult enough, right? Because all they see is the number on the page. They don't know about annual maintenance escalation costs rising and net new licenses and net new widgets of the license I already own. So suffice to say, it was very challenging from a financial perspective. I knew that the deadline for this new system to go live was quickly approaching, and we probably weren't going to make that deadline. So the cost benefit analysis, the TCO for this new system was being challenged because my mainframe costs, which should have gone down once they retired the application, continued to stay flat or rise. And I had to do something. I had to reduce cost. The software maintenance budget traditionally had been a place where Edison leadership team would go to get some savings, right? Because without a very mature SAM practice, there is a lot of waste in software maintenance, right? All of this came together, and I'm like, Rowan, Tomas.
And that's when you... And Rowan, what was your reaction when, did you feel you were ready when Chris reached out and said, "Can you guys support the Z mainframe?"
I feel bad now because, and from the early doors when we initially had the conversations, Chris was kind of pushing us. Look at the mainframe. Can we extend the same offering across that? And unfortunately, back then we kept pushing back and say, and we felt a bit bad because naturally it's in our DNA to help organizations. We don't like to see them in a situation where they have no choice. But if I'm honest, I guess the reason behind the kickback, or maybe because the time wasn't right, is because where we were at that point in time, this was about 2019, what we had learned as a business was that we really didn't have a story, and we misunderstood the situation around the security aspect, okay? Customers' requirements about the exposure, new vulnerabilities for the software products. And I'm talking about the Password Advantage, our core business at the time. And we had a large project at the time to deep dive and create a new service offering around that to provide the confidence to customers. I think because we had we had grown, we're in 18 different countries at this stage, and we had a big client base. And I think the focus there was to provide that confidence to those customers and a sense of duty to those. So I think at the time, we were laughing, but we had to finish that first. And I remember the last time Chris came, it must have been the start of 2020. So we had just finished that whole project around the security services. Myself and Chris were talking, and I shared with him, I guess if I go back to some of my ambitions, when we started the journey, we were very much at the heels of IBM. Okay, so it's like we were taking the scraps, right? But my personal mission was, how can we show that an offering from a third-party software maintenance perspective can be better in terms of what you get from the vendor? And that's a really difficult thing to prove, okay? And I remember showing Chris from a security perspective, we had developed it out so much that we were able to create fixes for vulnerabilities that IBM could not even do for current and the fully patched versions of the products. And I think so then for us, the time was right. So now we had finished this off. The maturity was there with the Passport Advantage offering. The other thing is, we didn't start with the mainframe. We always knew eventually we would get into that, but we wanted to cut our teeth in the distributed side of things first, right? We wanted to mature that out, perfect it, before we start getting into the mainframe environment. But then I think the time, or as Chris would say, the moons and the stars started lining up. It was the right time.
So now
to have
you
a
feel,
conversation.
Rowan, you're confident in being able to scale the business, starting with Edison as an example, but now Origina is in a good position to open up the service for other Z clients.
So I bring it back to the conversations with SCE. From our perspective, so we didn't identify any showstoppers why we couldn't do this, okay? But if I go back to our Passport Advantage business, we always have to start with the licensing and the legal constructs first, okay? We have to make sure we don't overcommit and we don't equally expose a customer, okay? So we started with that first. We looked at the products, and today we specifically focus on the OTC, or the perpetually licensed one-time charge products. And I think with the team in SE, we were quite honest and transparent. We haven't done this before, okay? We have the skills and expertise, because many of the experts we have today also do the same for mainframe, but we haven't actually provided this as a service to a customer yet. So we engaged in a very transparent manner. We met the executives, we put the risks on the table, and I think we embarked on a journey in a co-creation engagement to say, let's walk this journey together. We'll do a repeat of that 6 month with the MQ story. Let's do a trial. Let's build the confidence. And I think today, where we are, we're now, SCE have moved forward from that, where they've dropped the maintenance, and now they're in the second term with Origina for third-party software maintenance.
And Chris, did that spirit of transparency, the partnership, did that help you internally to sell to your leadership, and why it made a natural extension to move it to Z support?
Absolutely. So, from my perspective, I had grown up in a world where my IBM support team, the folks who came on site to the shops that I worked in prior to Edison, knew so much about the shop and knew how we operated their software, and they really cared. Fast forward to today and 5 years ago, where you make a call to IBM and you get somebody at a help desk somewhere, and you get moved around multiple times before you get your problem resolved. The experience with Origina was very, very different. Each one of the vertical product areas that we had given to Origina on the distributed side of the house, we would have, getting to know you essentially sessions where the global expert from Origina would learn all about how we were using these particular IBM products that we were now turning over to Origina to provide maintenance on. It garnered a lot of trust from our technical staff, right? And it's very important that your technical staff understands what Origina is here to do. It's not to misplace your own staff. It's to help give a better support structure to those products that you might not be doing version upgrades on, that are just going to be around for maybe not ad infinitum, but for some finite set period of time. Along with the technical side, the ground up side, we also needed to sell from top down. I told you I had some very, very serious budget constraints, and my director level was quite aware that we had, as I told you, they would always go to the software budget, right, to pull some fat out. He was very aware that I had pulled out about just as much fat as I could out of the budget, right? And we needed to do something dramatic, especially because our mainframe costs should have gone down due to the migration, but they hadn't because we were still running. I was able to show them by the history of what had happened on the distributed side, right? And because Origina once again gave us a mainframe trial to support one of our mainframe products. By November, December of 2021, after Rowan and I had regular calls for, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 months, and I'd be like, Rowan, are you ready or not? Come on. So he's finally
Isn't it great
ready.
when you have a customer that challenges and pushes you like that?
I pushed him. I'm like, do this, right? So I want a piece of the business.
And plus, you were seeing the benefits on the Passport
Absolutely.
Advantage side. Because
Absolutely.
not only the financial, but also the service, the flexibility.
Absolutely.
And you wanted to translate those benefits into the Z product.
So here's what happened. So we were already declining our IBM spend. So I know some potential clients might have the fear that if they drop maintenance on an IBM product, they're not going to get any support. Well, the truth of the matter is that support isn't like it used to be from IBM, number one, right? And number two, unless you're a super large player, right, with IBM, I'm not so sure that it makes that much difference, frankly. However, long story short, we did engage for quite a comprehensive set of IBM products. We had held back giving our CICS support. CICS is the predominant transaction processing system on the mainframe since Sturt was new. And we held back because we were like, oh man, we got to make sure that CICS stays up and running. And at the end of 2021, based on the great experience we had during 2021 with Origina on the mainframe, we then turned over CICS to Origina.
So then it was my turn to challenge Chris. Come on.
Give
Proving
me
the
some
trust.
more.
You pushed us. You got to give us more. But,
All right, gentlemen, final thoughts here. Chris, maybe we start with you. What advice would you have for IBM customers who are considering moving not only Passport Advantage, but the Z mainframe and looking at third-party software maintenance as an option?
I'm happy to share my thoughts on that. So I'll concentrate on mainframe for a second.
Yes.
So mainframe platforms are very, very stable to begin with, both the hardware and the software, right? And most mainframe shops who practice an 18-month to 2-year upgrade cycle for operating system, etc., they have tried and true processes. They can recover from faults. They can do full backups, full restores. So you've got to have that basic solid platform to begin with. Number two, before I would enter into any contract for third-party support, whether it's distributed or mainframe, I'd look at my problem history to IBM, right? So we open up things to IBM called PMRs or problem tickets, right? Before we gave Origina that support to do third-party software maintenance on the mainframe, we looked at every one of those products and the calls that had been made to IBM. And essentially, when we evaluated that, all the products that we were running on the mainframe were running quite well, right? I wasn't having problems with them. I didn't plan to do a version upgrade, but I did need to look at all of those factors first before we decided to make the leap from IBM to Origina. You also, and this is I guess a you understood kind of a comment I'm going to make, but you really do need to look at your costs. And if your driver is cost reduction, and if all the other variables line up, there's no better game in town, in my humble opinion. The support is great. The relationship is great. The hands-on that you get from the Origina support staff, the experience and depth of the global IBM experts that Origina employs to provide this maintenance are second to none, right? If you look at those factors and you find out that your shop is in a position where it's not going to be doing many version upgrades, where you want to continue to run an older version of IBM software, this is your ticket, guys.
Right.
Origina.
Thank you, Chris.
Right.
Rowan, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's been a learning exercise. I mean, we have a different challenge, I guess, when we think about the mainframe service offering itself. Funnily enough, as part of that journey, we identified that maybe security wasn't going to be as much of a concern compared to distributed systems. I think the bigger challenge we were going to face was more due to the nature of the mainframe, right? So with distributed, you typically have single application, single database server on a system. Whereas in mainframe, you've got hundreds of applications maybe running on one operating system, okay? So I think the biggest challenge we were going to face more there was around the interoperability piece. So customers would have OTC licenses that drop their maintenance, version entitlements to a certain point, but maybe ZOS will be on MLC, so they'll continue to have access to new features, and maybe there's other applications that will continue to be on maintenance with IBM. So sometimes the challenge is if a customer does look to do a bit of an upgrade, we want to make sure from an interoperability perspective that we can make that environment work seamlessly. Now, I guess in one sense, from a mainframe perspective, these are practices that are, well thought out and ironed out. This is standard BAU. So customers are very familiar with running end-of-life products and so that, coexisting with newer versions. The mainframe was built for compatibility. So not just resilience and, zero downtime, but compatibility in mind as well. So I think it's a different type of challenge. But the great thing in terms of what we've been able to do is continue, it's the same service.
Yep.
Same tried and tested service. We've matured it and developed it. We're now just extending across mainframe. And I think the other thing, coming back to the confidence, even though we started this business in 2012, we have a really long heritage in the IBM stables. So we're not the new kids on the block. Our expertise goes way back. And we were talking about it this morning. Recently IBM classified some of the older, as we would call the true bluers, dino babies. Well, guess what? We love dino babies, right? And all of our IBM experts, and these are guys who are seasoned professionals. They've been in the game a long time. They're our vintage, right? But the great thing about it is they live for one thing, and that's providing customer satisfaction and fixing problems. And we're so lucky as an organization, we've been able to attract that into the business. And more importantly, use that to help customers like, Chris in Southern California Edison, to help them with the challenges they have. So it's, it's humbling to hear that from Chris. It's been what I love about it as well is, it's the partnership approach we take with customers. I like to think that we don't overcommit. We're really, open and honest when we engage in that type of a manner. And I think this is a very successful outcome for both. And I'm really looking forward in terms of where we take it going forward.
Great, excellent.
Let me underscore one final thought.
Yes, please.
So we talk about these days, the buzz is digital transformation, right? Well, those dollars that I was able to save both on the Passport Advantage side as well as the mainframe side help fuel the innovation and the digital transformation. I can't say enough about really looking at that whole pie of expense that we have in IT and figuring out what's going to go where and how to keep the lights on software and reduce that burden as much as possible. And that's what Origina helps us do.
Great point, Chris. You have freed up your people, your time, your money. And moved them from keeping the lights on to doing what the business really wants you to do, right? Exactly. And move the needle for the business as an increased revenue projects or decreased cost to take market share from competition. So that's where you benefited as well.
That's it. Thanks so much. Hari.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris.
My pleasure.
And thank you, Rowan.
Thank you, Hari.
For your insights
My pleasure,
and sharing your perspectives as a customer, and Rowan for helping us understand why Origina is in such a great position to have many more Edisons to support the Z mainframe product.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody,
Thank you
for your time today.
Thank you.
Looking forward to catching you in another session. Go to origina.com to learn more about what we do, and we'd love to continue the conversation.